Doug.
Here we have the Limu Emu in its natural habitat, helping people customize their car insurance and save hundreds with Liberty Mutual. Fascinating. It's accompanied by his natural ally, Doug.
Limu? Is that guy with the binoculars watching us?
Cut the camera. They see us.
Only pay for what you need at libertymutual.com.
Liberty, 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 liberty.
Savings vary. Underwritten by Liberty Mutual Insurance Company and affiliates. Excludes Massachusetts.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of Monster Donut, a literary and historical deep dive into the Percy Jackson series and all of its following spin-offs. I'm Emily, a classic scholar-ish.
And I'm Phoebe, a dramaturg and story consultant. And we just got off a Zoom call with Rick Riordan and Mark Oshiro.
They finally let us talk to them.
We've just left a Zoom call where we trapped Rick Riordan and Mark Oshiro is really what happened.
No, it was a lot of fun. I'm really excited for y'all to get to hear what they had to say. We did get a chance to read The Court of the Dead, an early copy of it, before interviewing them as well. And this interview is actually going to come in two parts. So part one was going to be the vast majority of the questions we asked were non-spoilery, which is why you're able to listen to them now. But we also asked a few questions about what's in the book that you're going to be able to hear the answers to in our episode covering The Court of the Dead once it's released. Thank you again so much to everyone at Disney Publishing for making this happen. And thank you to Rick and Mark for being good sports.
Yeah, thanks. Big thanks to them for that. Yeah, I think the only context that anyone needs before listening to this is really the back of the book, the Cosmopolitan article. So as long as you sort of know what the book's about, you can listen to this episode. If you don't want to know anything about what the book's about, maybe hold on to it. All right, let's go. Rick, Mark, welcome. We have got another Nico D'Angelo adventure on its way. Court of the Dead is upon us. Very, very exciting. I want to start us off talking a little bit about Nico himself, because this book is coming out at an interesting time. We have season 3 of the TV series currently filming, meaning that, Rick, you are currently handling Nico at sort of the earliest point in his journey and the latest point in his journey in these Nico D'Angelo books. So first question, I'm curious if you've found these two versions of Nico informing each other. Are you, learning things about Nico that you might not have if you weren't working on both things simultaneously?
For me, yes, it's always fascinating to see all the different iterations of Nico D'Angelo at work. And I guess much like a real person, he changes over time. My understanding of him becomes deeper and more nuanced the more I learn about him. Certainly, the television show has been already really fun for me to see the characters sort of manifested in a different media and in a different way, and seeing the actors kind of inhabit those characters has been really wonderful. It's brought a lot to my understanding of what's possible for their personalities, and yes, we're in early days for season 3. But my heart just about exploded when I saw Nico D'Angelo, little baby Nico in the the bleachers at the dance at Westover Academy, his first appearance, and it was just so wonderful and it kind of amazing.
Yeah, we were so excited to see the announcement of Levi's casting at Comic-Con.
Oh yeah, he's such a wonderful, sweet kid. Can't say enough good things, and his work so far is just incredible.
It'd be cool to see him getting to meet Percy for the first time as well, coming up pretty soon. And that was actually, my question was, one of my favorite aspects of The Sun and the Star was getting to see Percy from Nico's perspective. And it's kind of interesting because Percy to Nico is this like almost mythic figure, I feel like, because he's part of the mythological world when Nico enters. And then I especially love the way he was portrayed in the dream sequences in The Sun and the Star, where he kind of takes on, it feels like he's larger than just a person in a way. And so I really wanted to ask how you approached writing Percy from Nico's perspective and how also that sort of plays into Nico and his identity.
I think I actually have to answer because I'm pretty sure I came up with the dream
Yeah.
sequences.
Incredible dream sequences, first of
It's pretty
all.
rare with the sun and the star, and I think even more so the case with Court of the Dead that we can sort of pinpoint what was one person's contribution because we
Mm.
went back and forth so many times. But if I remember, even in the outline, it was just like Nico has a dream, and it was like, well, I got to figure out what that is, you know. And
Yeah.
so I think that is also a byproduct of sort of me being an outsider to the Percy Jackson series because Rick is obviously the creator of it, and having to write this character who to me feels larger than life because it's
Mm.
Percy. Like it, what do you mean? It's Percy. And so I think that's a little bit of my own perspective coming through. And then as Rick adds his flair and edits scenes and whatnot, um, I think it was important for us to make sure we show, like, really seeding the narrative in Nico's eyes, and that we are so in his head now in a way we haven't been, that I think it was this really cool chance for him to, because it's also interesting that we see it through his eyes in a dream, and we also see Percy through his eyes, but only interacting with his mom.
Mm.
And it's not quite direct either. And I really enjoyed exploring what that means for this person who Percy, you ask him, he's like, I'm not larger than life. Get that away from me. I don't want to think of myself that way. But I think a lot of people in that universe do think of him and his accomplishments and his character in this grandiose way because of what he's been able to accomplish.
Yeah. I think the complexities of the way that Nico looks at Percy are also like really, really fascinating in these books. Like we were just talking about the specifically queer, messy perspective that Nico has on Percy. Like watching him deal with all of these feelings and memories and just trying to like put together exactly what his feelings are on Percy at this point. It's just it's an incredible exploration of what it is to be a queer teenager.
I mean, I have to thank Rick for letting, bringing me onto this project, but then also giving me the creative freedom to add those sort of elements to someone's story. I mean, that is what I hope feels real and tangible coming from the queer experience. I think a lot of us do have very complicated feelings about the people we grew up with and the people we were around, particularly if we were in environments where we couldn't necessarily safely express ourselves. And
Mm.
I think, especially writing for children, we're both thinking about how books can be a safe place for kids to have messy, complicated thoughts. If anything, that's why it's still all these years later for both of us so fun to write for kids in a way that I feel maybe adults are a little restricted in that they're thinking,
Mm.
oh, I gotta things the appearances matter a little bit more. But the fun of writing for kids and writing characters who are younger is a lot of times they haven't developed that. They don't have that. They're just their feelings are right there. They're on this, and boy, they will tell you in 1 second what those feelings are. And so getting to put that angle into the book felt very satisfying as well.
Hmm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, speaking of my instinct is to say, speaking of gay people, one of my favorite aspects of reading The Sun and the Star was uncovering more about Will, and watching all of the ways that Nico and Will were still learning how to be together. We're still like finding all of the places where they aligned or where they didn't, and just really, getting to dig into Will and what makes him the right fit for Nico, in a way that to this point we hadn't to this level in these books. And so I'm curious how you both went about building Will, both as a partner to Nico and as a character in his own right for this series.
I I think Mark had some really beautiful things to say about this. I remember last when we were on tour for the book, and I think we're both in agreement and both enjoyed the challenge of writing a relationship that was in process. You see a lot of books that are about meet cutes and about first encounters and realizing that you're in love. You don't see quite as many books about, okay, now we're together, what the hell does that mean? How do we navigate this? What is a relationship? How do you do this? And so to see two young people trying to figure that out under literally the most difficult circumstances in Tartarus, I think that you put those two people into a pressure cooker and you let them figure out, as you said, who they are individually, but also who they are together. And that was one of, I think, the most rewarding things about working with Mark on the book.
I appreciate that. And I also want to say that Will was the hardest character to write for me. It
Mm.
took me, and we had discussions to shout out to Becky Riordan, who was very
Absolutely.
helpful in giving feedback and finding where Will's voice was and what his experience was. And I remember one of the early comments in the drafts is that there was this disparity between what Nico knew about Tartarus and what Will didn't know. And
Mm.
so there were moments in the early drafts where Will came off a little too much like a dumb blonde, which wasn't what we were going for. Like he's a very competent, extremely intelligent person, but he does have this gap in knowledge.
Mm.
And so actually what that then turned into, which I think a lot of that work was Rick and Becky as well, was finding out what is it that Will does know? What does he provide for Nico? And then how does that switch and sort of subvert?
Mm.
So it was interesting seeing Nico become a caretaker when we don't necessarily he has before. That's the thing. It's not like he's never done it, but there was this almost this switch as they get into Tartarus where it's like, oh, this is very fascinating to write.
Mm.
And so I think that is where a lot of that came out of was actually as someone new to writing this character that it was it was a challenge. It was a challenge to figure out how he was going to sound and how he was going to behave in this book.
To transition us a bit more into specifically talking about Court of the Dead, also, one of the things I really also loved about this book was, I mean, I think a major theme of all Percy Jackson books is breaking the cycle and sort of taking those steps to change the status quo, even if they're small, because depending on the book, sometimes it does, things do change, but it's always in a different way. And I know you've talked already a lot about how this book specifically explores a lot of new aspects of the world, or sheds new light on aspects of the world we know, such as the nature of the life of a monster, as well as the role of justice and judgment. And so we were curious, when you were kind of coming up with the idea for this book, what drew you to those ideas specifically as that next step in kind of continuing this process of like breaking the cycle in the Percy Jackson world?
Mm.
Should I handle that since I this is my
Please, yeah, go for it.
this so I got to do something really cool, which was come up with the pitch and the idea for this book. So it came from me. And it came from the place of knowing the only thing I knew about getting to do a second book was that Hazel was going to be in it. And I knew,
Mm.
like, we had talked, like, Hazel has to play a big part. So I went back to reading a lot of the Hazel chapters in the previous books and trying to find what is a similarity between her and Nico that I could
Mm.
pull out. And it was both of them deeply dislike being judged.
Mm.
And I went from that place. Okay, if that's where they have this commonality that hasn't really been explored with the two of them in multiple scenes together. What would be a situation? And I just had this image in my head of, well, I could say it now because it's on the cover, the Minotaur just hanging
Mm.
out and Hazel being like, this is my best friend. And everyone being like, what? What do you mean? What are you talking about? And so I think that fit really neatly into the thread of some of what we saw, at the end of The Sun and the Star, where they're going into too much spoilers about what choice means. And
Mm.
that choice, and given agency, what will monsters do if they realize they can choose more than one path forward? So it was taking that and exaggerating it very far in one direction, but then dealing with the realities of it. I love a fantasy book in which the rules change, but I also sometimes think no one really addressed, or not no one, but that it isn't addressed what that actually means for the world. And so much
Mm.
of this was like, well, let's sit in how deeply complicated it is that these kids have been justifiably raised and trained to see these people as the enemy, and what happens. I don't want to know, what happens
Mhm.
when they show up. That's all I'll say. Like this absolutely absurd group of characters who were so much fun to create, but like, and like drawing them as or creating them as both very chaotic, sometimes very thorny people who you can't
Mm,
get close to some of the cutest things we've ever
Mhm.
created. And having
Mhm.
that spectrum of like, well, some of them are easy to love, but some of them are not so easy to love. And what does that mean? And so that was sort of the impetus. And when I handed that draft to Rick, like he dialed everything up to 400. I wasn't even going to say 11, like to 400. And it was such a delight to see him go from this starting point and be like, but wait, we can go even further.
Yeah, no, you're right. I mean, it all went from a conversation we had about the Minotaur, and
Mm.
you took that idea and ran with it. But it's so appropriate too that he's on the cover and that he's sort of the starting point because I mean, you're talking about a guy who didn't ask for his life to be the way it
mm,
was, who was literally stuck in a maze. And what happens when you're not in that maze anymore? And you
Mhm.
realize that there are a lot of directions that you can go. What does that mean for you and for the world? And I always have a soft spot for misfits, lovable and otherwise. And I think there is such a great gang of them here. I just love all of them.
Yeah, the specific concept of exploring like systems of justice and judgment in this book are it's also really interesting to me from like the Nico perspective, considering he's a character who like pointed out in Battle of the Labyrinth, like as an 11-year-old, the difference between justice and vengeance, but has also been like a character who has had to deal out justice and vengeance in his life. We've talked a lot about Nico's relationship to justice throughout this entire podcast, and so also bringing that into the conversation is also
mm,
very exciting to me.
And like getting it to address it very head on.
mm-hmm.
I don't think Rick and I think this is a very subtle book in terms of like the metaphor. It's very direct. And I also think, I mean, we wrote it two, oh my God, last year, 2 years
Oh,
ago?
jeez,
I don't know. A
who
period of
knows?
time ago.
Right.
And like you said earlier, it has become even more relevant to what kids
Mm,
are thinking about and the questions they're asking about the world. And so, you know, I mean, as unfortunate as some of life is right now, I am very happy to provide, I think we both are, to provide this vehicle for kids to think about the difficult questions of what it means to, what do you do when you feel like you want revenge, and
mm.
what is the cost of that revenge, and you know, um, we'll save the rest for spoiler
Yeah, yeah.
conversation, dancing around it. But
I
yes.
know there's so many follow-up questions I want to ask, and I'm like, not yet.
All right, I wanna take a step back and talk a little bit about this collaboration. Rick, you have talked about working with Mark, about how that has sort of opened up your writing emotionally a little bit, both with these Nico books and with the senior year books, and that you're spending more time with the characters' emotions, giving them room to breathe and process. And so I'm curious if in spending that extra time in your characters' inner emotional worlds, whether it's with Nico and this series or with Percy, Annabeth, and Grover. Have you learned anything new about them since you're spending that time with them?
Oh, sure. I mean, I think that one of the things that I don't talk a lot about explicitly in the books, especially the early ones, is how traumatic these events are for the characters who are going through them. And, I think I remember hearing uh, like a hard-boiled mystery writer years ago talking about why he chose not to do that. And he said, if I really was true to the amount of trauma I put my characters through, they would be in a catatonic state. There's
Mm.
no way that you could ask an actual human being to go through the level of horror that I'm putting my characters through. And I think there's some truth to that we have to a little bit suspend disbelief that these characters, especially young characters, are quite as heroic and resilient as they are in the face of all of this that they have to deal with. But it is important to step back and think about how would a 16-year-old person react to something of this magnitude? And so I think that's one thing I've learned is that it's really helpful to step back and acknowledge, wow, that was a lot.
Mm,
Maybe let's unpack that for a few minutes. Let's talk. Let's acknowledge. And there's some beautiful scenes in Court of the Dead that I don't think are spoilery, but that Mark did about Nico looking for help and finding help in others
mm,
to process everything he's gone through. And that is
mm,
not something that before the collaboration I would have thought to do, but it's
mm,
really powerful to have those sort of quieter moments. If anything, at Camp Hepla can be quiet, where they get to talk to each other and say, you know, I'm here if
mm,
you need to talk.
mm.
And that makes them more human, and it makes the story, I think, resonate with readers a lot more.
In a similar vein, Mark, we wanted to ask you because you're no stranger to writing the supernatural. In your own work, you deal a lot with that as well. But I was wondering if working specifically in the Percy Jackson universe has taught you anything new about writing that, and specifically, like, I think something I'm also deeply fascinated by as someone who also like writes a lot of queer characters in horror is the relationship between queerness and monstrosity. So
Oh,
has working within
oh,
Percy Jackson taught you anything or brought any new thoughts about
I knew we need
that?
another hour, first of all, on that alone. I think, well, from a craft perspective, I don't tend to write the kind of adventure plot, middle grade, early YA that Rick does. And so much of my experience, especially, and I described this when I'm talking about the collaboration too, of like one weird part of it is that I turn in a manuscript and then I get it back and it's different.
Mm,
And it's not edited like red line edits where an editor is suggesting it's I have to sit and spend 4 to 5 hours and read the whole book because Rick has changed. I cannot tell you how different draft one to draft two was. Fully, completely different scenes, entirely different directions. And so just on a craft perspective, it's like, oh, a part of this that's been really cool for me is getting like a front row seat to watching how someone else drafts a novel and watching how someone else structures,
mm,
particularly adventure novels. And I noticed with both of the projects I've written since Sun and the Star, Jasmine is Haunted, and I actually about 2 weeks ago turned in my new YA horror book. Very excited about it.
yeah.
And one thing I was thinking of is how, I guess I never really noticed this in the Percy Jackson series, is when Rick chooses to end a scene and move on to the next one in a
Mm,
chapter, and how often those are often these big striking moments that make me feel like, oh, but I got to read the next chapter. And then I finish the next chapter and I'm like, I'm not quite satisfied. Let me read one more. And I don't know that I ever thought of that specifically in context of a
mm,
book. And so I noticed in both of the projects I've written since then that started happening where I am ending it
mm,
these scenes at these very dramatic points, and I like it. It's a very fun way to write. I think as well, this book was even more so than Sun and the Star, a chance to lean into the queer Greek myth part of me
mm,
and getting there. And then we'll get this is full spoiler territory, so I won't say, but there are some characters and creatures that I got to, pull from my vault of like, I've never seen this in a story before. There's a couple suggestions from Rick of like, we should make these two show up that ended up being so ridiculously fun. And I think more than anything, that aspect of like so many of us grew up on the classics, grew up just I guess idolizing Greek mythology and like the storytelling that came with it. And now we get to take that and shape it into something new. And I feel like this was the one where I was like, well, I did a little bit of it in Son of the Star, and then Rick and I were like, we are going to go all out. And there's so many new characters and ideas, and there's a gadget that I've wanted to put in a book for a very long time, and this was the perfect chance to be like, here we go. I don't see this in stories, and it fits this one really well. So it is what a delight.
And I got to, since you mentioned it, I have to plug Jasmine is Haunted. Great stuff.
It is great. I have read it and I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
All right. One last question before we head into spoiler territory. It's a weird one, and I apologize. It is specifically for Rick. We're going to leave Nico D'Angelo behind for a moment. And I'd like to take us back to 2007. Emily and I were attending middle school in a little town called Westport, Connecticut. You came for the Rabbit Hill Festival and toured our middle schools. That's the last time we encountered each other before this Zoom call. And then The Last Olympian came out, and Westport, Connecticut was revealed as Luke's hometown. And we are big Luke fans. We bring him up in every episode, even when he's not relevant.
Including this one.
Including this one. So we couldn't have you on this podcast without asking you, what about Westport Scream's villain origin story? And to be clear, we agree. Like, genuinely, you couldn't have picked a better town for Luke to be from. We've talked at length about this, but I'm sure you have your reasons for it. So I'm curious if you remember why you chose Westport for those scenes with May.
I can't say 100%, but I suspect it was probably that visit. And nothing bad to say, really, that happened during that visit. It's just, I am not, or I was not familiar with the Northeast very much at that time. And it was so different than where I grew up in Texas. And it just made an impression on me. And so I was thinking about a place that would be interesting for Luke to be from, that I could explore a little bit more, that wasn't too far away from the action at Camp Half-Blood. And that seemed like a pretty logical place. Mm-hmm. It really wasn't anything more than that, I don't think.
I have a very strong memory of being incredibly annoying as a child around you. So I've had a secret theory of that.
I have no memory of that, if it helps at all. I'm sure you were perfectly lovely.
All right, we are going to head into spoiler territory now. So to our listeners, if you'd like to hear the rest of our conversation, you can hear it in our episode covering The Court of the Dead after it comes out on September 23rd. And you should also check these guys out on tour. We'll put the info on that also in our episode description. Thank you all for listening to Monster Donut. Thank you, Rick and Mark, once again for being with us. This was such a fun conversation, and you can hear us continue it in our next episode, our Court of the Dead episode, where we will be doing our usual sit here and predict, then read the books with mic in hand, and then come back together and discuss.
Yes, and see if we get bingo. You can find a bingo board if you want to play along on our social media, which is at PJOPod on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and Blue Sky.
Yeah, I might also put a link to it in our description of this episode. Also in the description of this episode, like I mentioned, we're going to put info on Rick and Mark's book tour.
We're going to be in New Jersey on the 24th. Come say hi if you see us. We'll be with a few of the other Percy Jackson podcasters and the podcast fam.
Yeah, and pick up your copy of The Court of the Dead on September 23rd. It's a fun one. Yeah. I'm excited to talk about it. Like, we, at this point, just so everyone knows where we are in chronologically, we only talked about this book enough to put questions together for today and haven't actually recorded our thoughts on the book yet. So, looking forward to knowing what you think.
Mm-hmm. We've got much to discuss.
On all of those social medias, you can also find our link tree where we've got links to our merch shop if you'd like to check out our merch. We've got links to our Patreon if you would like to support the podcast in that way and get some bonus content. We usually post ahead of interviews like this a call for questions. So if you'd like to throw a question out there for any of our future interviews or just want a heads up about what our future interviews are, you can join us over on Patreon. You can also always email us at monsterdonutpodcast@gmail.com if you've got a question for us, or, I don't know, preemptively want to be like, I know you'll get Walker Scobell back on this podcast. Here's my question in advance. But we greatly appreciate it if you have supported us monetarily. But if you don't have the means to do that at the time, or just don't want to, you can support us by leaving a rating or review on whatever platform that you're listening to this podcast on right now. All of it helps us out greatly. Tell a friend we exist, and we're deeply grateful for it. Thank you, everyone, for being with us all this time. This episode is a big milestone, and so we're just happy that you all have been here with us and making it happen. And big thank you to those of you over on Patreon, our patrons. Latino Kaya, Patty VCK, Bethany from Public Works, Sydney Fox, Joke, Reina Avila Ramirez Ariano, Ethan Not Nakamura, Kels, Mason Bowman, Casey Cassidy, Busy Cat, Natalia, Melissa Rounds, Cake Coffee, Sasha, Alana, Pamela Ion, The Kid on Her Own, Grace Junker, Kaylee, Manu Munchin, Calamity, Eddie Burns, Sarah Brown, Colby Redfern, May, Anna, Christina Kim, Bad Luck, and B. Thank you all for being with us. We'll see you next time for Court of the Dead. So long. Goodbye.
Bye.
For 25 years, Brightview Senior Living Associates have been committed to creating a vibrant culture and delivering exceptional services, making Brightview a great place to work and live. If you're looking for a rewarding opportunity to serve your local community and grow, we want you to join our team. Brightview Senior Living is growing and actively seeking vibrant associates to join our community teams, including directors, healthcare, activities, hospitality, and dining. Apply today at careers.brightviewseniorliving.com. Equal employment opportunities. Text BV Jobs to 97211 to apply.